The kingdom of Gilneas was a prideful and isolationist nation. Not fully committed to assisting in the Second War, they only sent a token force to maintain affiliation and trade with the Alliance. Then they tried to express influence in the post-war environment, which, given their lack of political capital, didn't go particularly well. As the Second War's after-effects simmered, King Greymane ordered the construction of the Greymane Wall. The wall was to take advantage of some of Gilneas' natural terrain to isolate the majority of its territory, formalizing their isolationist policies. This would mean also chopping off several Gilnean territories beyond the wall, seceding them to Lordaeron. This didn't go over particularly well with quite a few people, including Lord Darius Crowley, a strong proponent of further cooperation with other nations, and a staunch supporter of the Alliance. As the Third War really began to ramp up, the distant edges of the Scourge started to scrape up against the wall. But even these disorganized periphery were too much for the wall and its defenders, and Greymane ordered the court Archmage Arugal a solution, which was not the best of ideas. The former Gilneans beyond the wall were crushed between Worgen and undead. In an act of defiance, Crowley sent a platoon of his personal soldiers to aid Miss Proudmoore's expedition to Kalimdor. This offer of aid to a foreign nation was declared as treason, because of course it was, and so the Northgate Rebellion began. Unfortunately, while Crowley was intelligent and a long-term planner, he simply did not have the resources or the manpower necessary to break the Loyalists. He and his followers were imprisoned for high treason. But it gets worse. Gilneas entered a state of total isolation. No one was allowed to their shores, refugees being turned away regularly in the wake of the Third War, and no one was allowed to leave either. Gilneas slowly descended into an economic and political stupor. And that's right about when the Worgen started making their way around and over the wall. Now, as mentioned briefly some time ago, the Worgen curse was just that, an affliction. Which means a highly infectious malady was now loose in a totally isolated environment with a large number of people compacted into a relatively small space. While Gilneas managed for years, this was an escalating problem, which came to a head after the campaign in Northrend, as the Worgen affliction finally hit a tipping point and began spilling into the streets in vast numbers. Those Gilneans present mounted a bit of an evacuating defense, freeing Crowley and his rebels, much to the objections of the loyalist Lord Godfrey and his two political supporters, Baron Ashbury and Lord Walden. This evacuation did about as well as it could, though one of the Gilnean champions was infected in the process. Months passed. The survivors made camp towards the shorelines of Duskmist. The Gilneans, at length, found and captured their champion in their mindless state, and gave them a lethal dose of an alchemical concoction designed to give them control back. Thankfully, this saved the champion rather than terminating them, much to the Lord Godfrey's chagrin. And right about now is when the cataclysm hit. The cataclysm is the culmination of several events that have been slowly weakening the geographical stability of the world, including that damned leyline meddling Malygos was doing. But really, the biggest and triggering event was Deathwing himself erupting from the elemental plane of Earth, Deepholm, shattering the world pillar and breaking the barriers between the elemental planes and Azeroth. The world would be forever changed by this event, something the Gilneans got an immediate taste of, as much of Duskmist sank into the sea and the Greymane Wall, which had endured for over 10 years, cracked wide open. This was bad for a lot of reasons, but coincidence ranks highest. You see, the Forsaken armies were already present and mobilized near the other side of the wall, as part of a new offensive ordered by War Chief Garrosh, long story. Already having claimed much of Silverpine and Hillsbrad, the Forsaken were more than eager to spill into Gilneas and take its strategic ports. Now fleeing Worgen swarms and Forsaken soldiers both, as well as the very land turning against them, Gilneans became refugees in their own territory as they escaped east towards Stormglen. Fortunately for all concerned, the Night Elves, headed by Belisra Starbreeze, were present and reached out to the Gilneans to aid them. You might reasonably ask, why? Well, aside from general decency, the truth is, the Worgen curse was their fault. To reiterate one last time, Worgen were an affliction, not a species. In ancient days, during the War of the Satyr, druids would actually wield the Worgen form, as they would bear or cat. The problem was, it imbued them with the very rage of Goldrun, the Loa of Wolves, and it was very easy to lose oneself to that rage. In an effort to curtail that, the druids submitted themselves to the Scythe of Elune, which had the opposite effect, afflicting them with the Worgen form and a state of violent mindlessness, and of course causing the curse to expand across 2 continents since. Thankfully, in the intervening years, the Night Elves had studied and developed a way to offset the mindless nature of the curse, something they offered freely to the Gilnean people. This of course meant the Gilneans were now effectively Worgens, just with their minds intact. During this, Greymane and Crowley finally mended the broken path between them over shared love of people and country, something Lord Godfrey couldn't stand the very idea of. Godfrey, Walden, and Ashbury quickly rallied their few loyalists and sold out Greymane and the Gilneans to the Forsaken, and were rewarded in kind. Unfortunately, their treachery did damage enough. Gilneas was simply falling to the overwhelmingly more coordinated and confident Forsaken force. Sylvanas Windrunner took to the field personally to kill King Greymane, although this failed thanks to Greymane's son taking the shot for him. Greymane would never forgive Sylvanas for the death of his son, not that you could blame him. Gilneas was lost. Greymane, supremely humbled by the events of the last few months, fled with what was left of their people to the waiting arms of the Night Elves, gratefully accepting their offer of sanctuary in the distant Teldrassil. This forged a bond between Night Elf and Gilnean that lasts to this very day, and would lead directly to the Worgen, formally joining the modern alliance. Greymane would soon become a fast friend and confidant of King Varian Wrynn, as well as a burgeoning uncle for Varian's son, Anduin Wrynn. And with Greymane so well positioned in the upper echelons of Alliance military, Gilneas' significance in world affairs was secured for years to come.